We live in a world that runs off credit. Good credit makes it possible to get a car loan or mortgage or credit card at the lowest rate. Bad credit can make it difficult to rent an apartment or get cell phone or cable service. I'm Herb Weisbaum, the Consumer Man, a contributing editor at checkbook.org.
Welcome to Consumerpedia at checkbook.org. We're the nonprofit that helps consumers select services, avoid trouble, and save money. Because we don't accept any advertising or take money from any business we recommend, you can rely on checkbook.org to be completely independent and objective. Now, here's the host of Consumerpedia, America's consumer expert, the Consumer Man, Herb Weisbaum.
We all know that good credit scores are important, but few people truly understand how the system works, what makes those scores go up, and what causes them to plunge, what to worry about, and what doesn't really matter. In this episode of Consumerpedia, we'll try to explain all that with help from award-winning journalist Liz Weston. Liz is a certified financial planner, a personal finance columnist for NerdWallet, and host of their Smart Money podcast, and author of the best-selling book, Your Credit Score, now in its 5th edition. Liz is also an old friend who knows how to make complicated financial stuff simple enough for even me to understand. Liz, so glad you could join us today.
It's my pleasure, Herb, as always.
So we're going to be using two terms during this podcast, so let's make sure everybody understands the terminology: credit file and credit scores.
Right. Credit scores are a 3-digit number that's compiled from your credit file or your credit report. And your credit file is the data that's basically contained in a credit bureau. So that's a lot of different ways to use the word credit, but the score basically crunches the information that's in your file and comes back with a number that lenders use to gauge your creditworthiness.
And this is how they're able to give you instant approval on a loan, whatever. They look at the credit score and says, hey, Herb is a really good credit risk or a bad risk. Yes, we're going to approve the loan. No, we're not. Here's the interest rate we're going to charge.
Right. Sometimes it's an almost instantaneous decision, and that's because typically the lender's just looking at one credit score and making a fairly low stakes decision. I mean, you're not going to get a mortgage with instant credit. That's going to take a little bit more information and digging. But, a credit card at the point of sale when you're checking out, that could be something that's nearly instantaneous.
How does the information get into my credit files that then become my credit score?
Well, you have no control over what goes into your credit file. So it's basically the data furnishers, and those are typically lenders, and it can also be public records like bankruptcies. Those can get in there. But typically it's a subscription service, so the lenders are providing information so that they can get information back on other people, so they're able to make credit decisions.
So my mortgage lender may report to the credit bureaus, my credit card may report to the credit bureaus, my auto loan, that sort of thing.
It typically, yes. And the big loans like mortgages and auto loans typically report to all 3 credit bureaus. Credit cards as well typically report to all 3, but maybe smaller lenders only report to 1 or 2.
In the past, landlords didn't often report to credit bureaus, but that's starting to change a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, landlords have long looked at your credit file and your credit score to make a decision about whether to rent you a home or apartment. What's changing lately is that rent information, in other words, how well you pay your rent, do you pay your rent on time, that's starting to be incorporated into the credit bureaus and into credit scores as well.
So when the information in my credit file is converted to a 3-digit code based on an algorithm, whatever credit scoring method the lender is using, what kind of things go into that score? What are the key factors in that score?
One of the most important things is, do you pay your bills on time? So skipping a single payment can knock more than 100 points off good scores. That's how important it is. Another thing that's really important is how much of your available credit you're using. So if you're maxing out your credit cards, even if you pay them off in full, that can hurt your score. There are a bunch of other things that are factored in: the mix of credit that you have, how long you've had credit, and when the most recent inquiry was, in other words, the last time you applied for credit. But really, it's your habit of paying bills on time or not, and how much of your credit that you're using that make the most difference.
It's interesting. 3 times in my life, my credit score dropped significantly. Once when I paid off my home loan. I don't think I was any riskier of a borrower, but that changed. Once when I paid off my car loan, again, same situation, the mix of credit changed. And once when I was changing computers because my computer died and I lost about a week's worth of email, didn't get the $25 bill that I had to pay on my credit card to Citibank, and wound up going 32 days. It showed up on my credit report. My credit score dropped 100 points as soon as that got reported to the credit bureau. It takes a long, long time for that to go away. So you really don't want to miss missed payments?
You really don't. It's like a mountain, it takes a long and arduous climb to get to the top, and it's really easy to fall. And it happens fast. It's much easier to lose points than to get them back.
What sort of things can listeners do in order to boost their credit scores besides making sure you always pay your bills on time?
I'm a huge fan of automatic payments to make sure that at least those minimums get paid. I know not everybody can do that. Not everybody has enough control or enough trust in the system to do that, but I really like automatic payments just to make sure that those little mistakes don't happen. Another thing you can do is make sure that you're only using a small portion of whatever your credit limit happens to be. Under 30% is good, under 20% is better, under 10% is best. The people with the highest scores tend to use single-digit credit utilization. And what that means is if you have a $1,000 credit line, you're using, less than $100 of that credit line at any given time of the month.
The scores look at that. They look at how much of your available credit you're using, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't really know if you pay off your balance in full or not. Typically, the most commonly used scores are just looking at what the credit companies are reporting, what the lenders are reporting. So what they typically report is your balance on your statement closing date. And sometimes people will make weekly payments to get that balance down. So people who are like me, love credit card rewards, might be running up a balance on a credit card, but they continually pay it down so that it doesn't show up as, a huge amount when it's reported to the credit bureaus.
So if it's important to keep those balances on your credit card at a certain level, is there a way to track that in real time and know what's going on?
Yeah, most credit cards will allow you to set up alerts. So you set the dollar amount, and once your charges go above that, you get an email or a text letting you know. And that way you can either pay off some of the balance, switch to another card, do something else to make sure that your balance doesn't get too high.
There are some things we do that don't help your credit score. The one thing that comes to mind to me is using debit cards. Can you talk about some of the things that aren't reported to the credit bureau, such as debit cards that won't help you improve your credit score?
Yeah, debit cards, prepaid cards, those kinds of things are not reported to the credit bureaus. We talked about rent payments, and that's something that's increasingly being incorporated, but not all credit scorers that are out there use rent payments. Not all landlords report rent payments. So if you're counting on your rent payments to build your credit, I would say look to other methods. Look to things like credit builder loans, secured credit cards where you make a deposit with the issuing bank and they give you a credit card with the same amount as a credit limit. Those are the kinds of things that have traditionally built your credit scores and that will in the future.
And I know a lot of parents say, my kid's gone to college, I don't want them to get in trouble, so I'm going to give them a debit card as opposed to a credit card. While that may make sense from one point of view, it doesn't help them start building a credit file.
Exactly. Maybe they should rethink that and add the child as an authorized user to a credit card. That's a situation where you don't have to give the child a credit card, but your good history with that card is typically imported into their credit history. And there's also an argument to be made to getting your child a credit card while they're still under your roof so that you can explain how they work and show them how to pay things off. Everybody's going to be different in terms of their level of tolerance, but sooner or later your kid's going to have credit, and trying to keep them away from it, probably not a good idea. It might be better to give them some training wheels.
And by making them an authorized user, you have control of what happens with that card. You could shut them off at any time, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, you don't even have to give them the card. They never have to use it. It's just that history with the card is imported to their credit file and can help them build credit. At some point, they're going to need to get a car loan, get a mortgage, and having good credit can really help that process.
So buy now, pay later really took off in 2021. It's so widespread now that I actually see commercials for PetSmart saying you can buy your pet products with buy now, pay later, which is like, I don't know why you want to do that, but a lot of people think, well, it's not a credit card. I can't get into credit card debt. At this point in time, it may change. Right now, as we're recording this, most of the buy now, pay laters don't report to the credit bureaus unless you screw up.
Yeah, exactly. And that may change, as you mentioned, and later in this year, more credit bureaus may be incorporating that information. But the real thing you have to watch out for is that, like any form of credit, buy now, pay later can induce you to spend more than you might otherwise. So it's a limited credit situation where you're supposed to be paying, maybe 4 payments and pay off the balance. But with any credit, you need to be careful to make sure that the spending is within your means and that you're not signing up for something that you can't really afford.
And remember, the reason why the retailer is offering this is because it's likely to close the sale and you are likely to spend more than you would otherwise. They have surveys that prove this.
Yes, exactly. And we should mention, again, you are not building credit this way when you use these loans. For some people, that's an advantage. They like that the information won't be reported to the credit bureaus unless they mess up. But on the other hand, if you don't have credit or your credit's thin, you're not helping it by getting a buy now, pay later loan.
A lot of people who have bad credit pay money to credit repair companies who promise that they will take care of the situation for you no matter what. What are your thoughts about credit repair companies?
The difficult thing about credit repair companies is it's hard to gauge which ones are legitimate, which ones are actually going to help you, and which ones are scams. You should know that a credit repair company can't do anything for you that you can't do for yourself. And unfortunately, a lot of them promise the moon. Some of them even encourage fraud. So I would be very careful about hiring somebody to do something that you could do for yourself where you don't really know a lot about the background of this company. So if you're going to do this, make sure you do a thorough job of researching the background. Check the Better Business Bureau. Check the name of the company and the word scams. A Google search on that could turn up some information, but just proceed with caution.
And as I've always said, in some cases, you can do more than these credit repair companies because a lot of creditors won't talk to them anymore.
Yeah, and that's something to keep in mind when you're dealing with the credit bureaus. We talked about how many of the credit bureaus are rejecting complaints or disputes because the information or the wording seems too canned or they think it's coming from a third party. You may actually have more success doing it yourself than going through another company if there's a dispute or an error on your credit report.
And bottom line, it's against the law for a credit repair company to charge you upfront a fee in any way, shape, or form. If they want money before they perform the job they promise for you, run. It's a scam.
Yeah, that's one way to really know that you're being scammed is if they ask for money up front.
We're talking to Liz Weston, a personal finance expert at NerdWallet and author of the best-selling book, Your Credit Score. She's also host of their podcast, Smart Money. Straight ahead, how to monitor your credit for free. You're listening to Consumerpedia, powered by checkbook.org.
You'll find a lot of information about credit on the checkbook.org website. If you live in these 7 metro areas, Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, San Francisco, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Washington, D.C., you can use Checkbook's independent ratings to find great services, from roofers to plumbers to kennels and vets. Ratings are for subscribers, so if you haven't joined Checkbook yet, check us out. Get a free 30-day subscription by going to checkbook.org/consumerpedia.
So Liz, everybody wants to keep track of their credit score. How do you check your credit scores for free?
The good news is you have a lot of different options. If you already have a credit card or a relationship with a bank, your bank or credit card lender might offer you a score for free. And it might even be a FICO, which is the most commonly used scoring formula. But there are also sites like NerdWallet that offer credit scores for free. Those are typically Vantage scores, which is a rival for the FICO. One thing you should know about credit scores is you don't have just one, you have many, and they change all the time. And you can't necessarily predict in advance which one a lender or a landlord is going to use. So the best idea is to keep track of at least one of your scores and monitor it over time, because that will alert you if there's a problem. If you see a big drop in your credit score, you know that you might have missed a payment or been the victim of identity theft. It gives you early warning of problems, but also you can see how your credit score reacts to different things over time. One thing you want to be careful about is not comparing apples and oranges. In other words, if you get a FICO 8 score from your bank and you compare that to the Vantage 3 score that you get somewhere else, they are likely going to be different. So they may react differently. And you may see one score that's higher than the other and think, oh, I've just lost all these points, when actually it's just 2 different scoring formulas. That's kind of hard for people to wrap their minds around sometimes. So I like to bring it up. You don't have one score, you have many, and they change all the time.
And it may not be the score, as you said, the lender has the algorithm create when it decides whether to give you credit or not. Yeah,
exactly. And lenders use scores that are tweaked for different industries. They use different generations of scores. It's kind of like operating systems with a computer. You know, you're using Mac or you're using Windows, you're using different generations. Credit scores are the same way. There's different, overall companies like Vantage Score and FICO, and then there's different generations within those different formulas. And then on top of that, they can be tweaked to different industries. Like there's a auto loan formula and there's a bank card formula.
One of the good things about getting your free score is they'll usually tell you why the score is where it is, such as the balances are too big on your credit cards, or you don't have a good enough mix of credit, or there was a late payment reported or something like that. So it really does help steer you in the right direction.
For the most part, absolutely. Those reasons that they give you why your score isn't higher or why it is the way it is can be super helpful when you're building or rebuilding credit. The higher your score gets, though, the less relevant those things can be. And I know many people are really ticked off when they say, okay, my score is 835. Now, scores are typically on a 300 to 850 scale, so anything over 800 is fantastic. And then they get this message saying your balances are too high. Even if they could fix that problem, it probably wouldn't make that much difference in terms of adding points. So once you're over, I would say about 760, 780 on that 300 to 850 score, you don't have much to worry about other than keeping your score high. You don't want to miss payments and mess things up, but you really don't have to worry because you're getting the best rates and terms.
And I just want to repeat something you said. Even if you're not in the market for credit, one of the good reasons to monitor your credit score is for a fraud alert. If you were cruising along at 800 and all of a sudden you go down to 650 a week later and nothing has changed, you've done nothing differently, you may be the victim of identity theft, and this is like an early warning system for you.
Absolutely. At that point, you need to go get your credit file, your credit reports. We've been talking all this time about credit scores. That's the number. It's the actual file that will contain the information that can help you find out what happened. And you get those from annualcreditreport.com. Watch out when you put that into your browser bar or search for that, because if you use a search engine, the first few responses might be ads. And a lot of people don't realize that, and they think they're going to get their free credit report and then they're asked for a credit card. If you're asked for a credit card or asked to pay anything, you're on the wrong site. You want annualcreditreport.com.
I get so many complaints about that, and I say to folks, you can't Google like free credit report. You've got to put in annualcreditreport.com and make sure you're there. And then you should request a report from each one of the big three, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I get the report. What do I do with it?
You start looking for major errors. And by major errors, that's accounts that you don't recognize, accounts being reported as late when you paid on time, things that really significantly will affect your credit. If they have various misspellings of your name, don't worry about it. If they have an old address, again, that's not a big problem. If there's an address you don't recognize at all, that could be a warning sign that there's a problem, that your file's been mixed with somebody else, or that somebody is trying to commit identity fraud in your name.
By law, you are able to get one free copy of your credit report from Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion every 12 months. But because of the pandemic, the credit bureaus have been allowing people to get a free report once a week. You really don't have to check your credit file once a week.
No, I mean, some people are so fanatical about this and really are focused on raising their scores that they will do that. But no, you really don't need to get it every week. But it's really nice to have that easy access where you don't have to worry about paying a fee to get your credit reports.
So we just did a story for checkbook.org. This Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, took a look at complaints people made about errors in their credit files that they gave to the CFPB and then the CFPB forwarded to the credit bureaus. And they found that something like 2% of the people got satisfaction when they complained. So we tell people, if you find a mistake, contact the credit bureaus, they'll take care of it. But this report, a damning report, shows that the credit bureaus really aren't doing that. What do you do if you report an error, it's significant, and they don't respond? Do you just keep complaining? Do you hire a lawyer and threaten to sue? What's the next step here?
This is so frustrating and really bothers me, because one of the responses for the credit bureaus of why they don't investigate these is, well, these are being generated by a third party. And even using a form letter that you find on the internet or that you get from the CFPB itself could trigger this decision. Well, this is canned boilerplate. We're not going to investigate this. Obviously, there's a big problem here. People should be able to correct the information in their credit reports, have it done in a timely manner, and not have to worry that these errors are just going to keep sticking around. The only thing I can say right now is be persistent. Don't let the credit bureaus shut you down. So if you don't get a response, or you don't get a response in a timely manner, or if they refuse to do anything, take it up with the issuer, the lender that supposedly reported this information, but keep after the bureaus. And yeah, maybe at some point you may have to hire a lawyer. I know a lot of people that have had trouble. They were just about to close on a home loan, for example, and they lost the house because of an error. So you want to be persistent, and you want to get in there early if you are going to be in the market for a major loan. Since this process can take time, You want to get there as early as you possible. I would say at least 6 months before you plan to get a loan. Make sure that you're reviewing your credit files and getting your credit scores so you know where you stand and you have time to start this process of fixing any problems.
You know, the credit bureaus say they pride themselves on being accurate, but last year, 2021, Consumer Reports asked nearly 6,000 consumers to take a look at their credit files, and more than 30% said they found an error. So as you said, clearly, there's a serious problem here.
Yeah, some of those errors might just be accounts that people don't recognize, and maybe they just don't recognize the name of the lender, that they actually do have an account there. But still, there are a lot of errors that are still part of your credit files, and people should have an easy way to get that fixed.
Up next, credit myths and credit facts. This is Consumerpedia, powered by checkbook.org.
Consumerpedia Fast Facts. Most negative items will remain on your credit report for 7 years at the most. A bankruptcy can last up to 10 years. Your credit report does not include personal information that is irrelevant to your credit. It does not include your marital status, race or ethnicity, religion, or political affiliations. Getting government assistance no longer has a bearing on your credit, and it won't show up on your report.
The website NerdWallet did a survey in the fall of 2021 that found that a lot of people don't understand the basics of credit reporting and are making decisions based on bad information. So, Liz, we're going to play a little game, fact or fiction, okay?
Sounds good.
Your credit report includes your credit score, fact or fiction?
Mostly fiction. I think one of the credit bureaus has been experimenting with putting a credit score in its written reports, at least the ones you get through the mail. But typically, no, your credit score is not included with your credit report.
Checking your own credit score can cause it to drop, fact or fiction?
Fiction. And this one is so persistent. NerdWallet study showed that nearly 2 in 5 Americans, 39%, thought that checking their own credit would cause their score to drop. And that's simply not the case.
On the other hand, if you apply for credit, especially if you do it a lot, that could make your score drop just a little bit.
Yes, and it's not usually a huge hit. With the FICO score, it's 5 points or less. People tend to get really upset about inquiries hanging around on their credit report. You don't want to apply for credit that you don't need, and you probably shouldn't apply for a bunch of credit at once. But you shouldn't let concerns about applying for credit hurting your score prevent you from getting the credit that you do need.
Am I correct that the algorithms have been tweaked so that if you're applying for a bunch of mortgages in the same little time frame or auto loans in the same time frame, that price shop, that won't count against you? It realizes that you're price shopping for one kind of loan.
Yes, exactly. You don't want to take that to mean that you can go out and apply for a credit card right before you apply for a mortgage, because again, those are two different types of credit. And you do want to do your shopping within a contained period of time. I think most of the formulas are now on, a 45-day stretch where they basically take all the mortgage applications and count them as one. But I would do it in even briefer time. I would say try to do it in a couple of weeks, because there are still some older scores out there that might not take that into account.
All right, back to our quiz. Carrying a small balance on a credit card is better for a credit score than paying it off in full each month. Fact or fiction?
Fiction, and can be a really expensive fiction. Nearly half of the people that NerdWallet surveyed, so 47%, thought that carrying a small credit card balance was better for their credit than paying it off in full each month. We talked about this. The credit scoring formulas, the credit bureaus typically don't know whether you pay your balance in full or not. So the better thing to do is to make sure you've got those paid off. And also, you should know, if you carry a bunch of balancers or have a bunch of balances on a bunch of different cards, that can hurt your score as well. So you don't want to be carrying these balances for financial reasons. They don't do you any good. And you don't want to carry a bunch of balances or use a bunch of credit cards, because that could be hurting your score as well.
I know people who say, I don't have credit cards, I pay in cash because I want a good credit score. Your credit score is based on your use of credit. If you don't use credit, you could pay everything in cash, not have a debt in the world, and you have a terrible credit score.
Exactly. You have to have and use credit to get a credit score. There are people who are multimillionaires who stopped using credit, who no longer have a credit score, and that's fine if they never need to or want to get another loan. However, credit information is also incorporated into your insurance premiums in most states. So not having credit could actually hurt you that way.
Final question. Closing a credit card you no longer use will definitely help your credit score. Fact or fiction?
Fiction once again. Again, nearly half of Americans, 48%, believe that closing a credit card they no longer used could help their credit score. Closing cards can't help your credit score, and it could hurt them. That doesn't mean you never should close a card because, you might not want to pay the annual fee. It might not be something that you want to monitor, but don't think you can get rid of bad information or do your score any favors by closing cards.
And there are two reasons why closing a card could hurt your scores. Could you explain what those are?
Yes, the big reason is that you're losing that card's credit limit. We talked about credit utilization, how much of your available credit you're using. When you shut a card, you're lowering that credit limit. So you're narrowing the gap between the amount of credit you use and the amount of credit you have. Longer term, the age of the card matters, and that can hurt your score if that goes away. But the big impact is from the credit utilization, the credit limit that you're losing.
Liz, it has been so great to talk to you today. Thank you for sharing so much information, making it simple enough that even I could understand it.
It's my pleasure.
Well, that's this edition of Consumerpedia. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you rate, review, and subscribe to us on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Remember, we release new episodes every other Thursday. Another way you can support the show is to follow Consumerpedia on Facebook and Instagram, and at My Consumerpedia on Twitter. I'm Herb Weisbaum, checkbook.org.
Consumerpedia is a public service of checkbook.org. We're a unique nonprofit that empowers you, the consumer, to save money and make smarter choices. From auto repair shops to doctors, plumbers to vets, you can count on checkbook.org to help you find the best services and avoid the worst. Local ratings are unbiased and accurate. If you live in or around these 7 cities and haven't joined Checkbook yet, check us out. Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, San Francisco, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Washington, D.C. To get your free 30-day subscription, go to checkbook.org/Consumerpedia. Consumerpedia, empowering consumers to save money and make smarter choices.